My friends, the binding of Isaac, known in Hebrew as the Akedah, is one of the best known and most troubling stories in the Torah. God orders Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac on Mount Moriah. Abraham agrees, but then is stopped at the last minute when God sends an angel who tells Abraham to sacrifice a ram instead. Historically, the dominant interpretation of this story has been that Abraham passed the test by being willing to sacrifice what he loved most. That this is a story about submission to God's will and binding Isaac for sacrifice was a supreme demonstration of Abraham's faith. And yet, earlier in this week's Torah portion, Parashat Vayera, Abraham's response to God's decision to destroy the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah provides a conflicting model. In that instance, Abraham questions, argues, and convinces God to back down from his extreme position. The bold, challenging Abraham of the Sodom narrative, just chapters later, demonstrates absolute submission before God's terrifying command to sacrifice his son, as if there was no alternative to the acceptance of God's will. Why did Abraham protest so strongly, so passionately on behalf of the Sodomites, yet submit silently when commanded to sacrifice his own son Isaac? Where was the emboldened Abraham of the Sodom confrontation with God, who cast a wary eye toward heaven and proclaimed, "Shall not the judge of the entire earth do justice?" but expresses no righteous indignation for his own son Isaac? Hebrew scriptures portray biblical characters challenging God: Moses, Jeremiah, and even some instances in which God acknowledges that those challenging him are right and that he has erred. In the Talmud and other sacred texts, protests against God were set in the context of a divine courtroom where God is judge, but in which he is actually on trial. Challenges also come in the form of prayers or parables. By not challenging God, perhaps the binding of Isaac was an instance of Abraham's failure. Faith has always been seen as naive, blind acceptance, but that is not the Jewish way. In Judaism, far from faith excluding questions and challenges testify to our faith. Shabbat Shalom.